morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. We are using time travel.
We have skipped past Christmas from an earlier date, and here we are, Robby.
The danger is if we introduce a time travel paradox. If we say something that does not come to pass, we might rip apart the fabric of the universe, and we'll have to get like the Avengers in here with the time stone or something.
We'll slide down a vortex, never to return.
We don't want that to happen. Or do we? Maybe we've been tearing at the fabric of the multiverse all along. But in the meantime, we are going to talk about the expensive taste of Gen Z. A recent Empower survey found that Gen Zers aspire to have a six-figure annual salary. The financial services firm interviewed people in that group. 2,000 respondents said they would need $587,000 to be financially successful. I wonder if that's a yearly income of that amount of money or just arrive at that amount of money.
Quite
I'm not
substantial.
sure. Well, wanting champagne on a beer budget might explain why there's been a shift from left to right among young voters. This group grew up in the age of social media and endless digital comparisons to more glamorous lives those apps have enabled. Plus, growing up amid financial and healthcare crises, along with student loan debates and housing affordability, are more factors that shaped Gen Z's attitudes about money.
According to Empower, half of those surveyed believe they are less successful than those around them, and that it's more difficult for their generation to obtain prosperity. So it's not hard to understand the ideological shift among Gen Zers. Recent data from Gallup and the Walton Family Foundation suggests that Gen Z teens are twice as likely to identify as conservative than their parents. 14% of 13 to 17-year-olds reported being more conservative than their parents. And when the same question was posed to millennials 20 years ago, 7% of 13 to 17-year-olds reported being more conservative. Those findings are consistent with voter turnout in the 2024 presidential election. According to Tufts Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, 39% of young voters voted Republican this year, compared to a smaller 30% who did so 4 years ago in 2020.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The shift to the right among much younger people is clearly evident from the data. There are a couple reasons I have for that. Certainly, I think some of the policy or economic changes, maybe we'll circle back to those. I do think that's a part of it. Another part of it is that I just think that Democrats, liberals, that coalition does not have at the moment like a lot of appealing national figures to attract people to that side and that ideology. If you think of, for millennials like myself, the millennial generation had Barack Obama, and then even Bernie Sanders for even more seriously progressive people making a big splash in the later 20-teens. He's still kind of on the scene, sort of, but his moment is a little bit past. I'm not insulting him to say that. The movement he created has subsided to some degree, and there just isn't another Obama-like figure on the horizon for the Dems, I think.
I think that is probably true. I think there are other elements to the story. I do think that AOC would be the most obvious example of a younger person who has that kind of charisma, but she is more a creature of the left, even though she has been moderated.
And a creature explicitly of politics. Barack Obama was a
cultural
figure. He was everywhere. He was bringing people in who weren't politics focused. If you're a politics focused young person at all open to liberal ideas, then you know who AOC is. You know who these people are. But your Obamas were and Bernie was reaching into a podcasting environment. We didn't understand the importance of it at the time. That was just beyond and was bringing people in. Whereas I think that's less of a presence now.
Well,
whereas Trump is an omnipresent cultural figure, and a lot of people now explicitly associated with the right, like Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, and every person that a young person might be listening to on a podcasting alternative platform has increasingly some degree of right-wing politics.
Well, to that point, I do think that the changing media diet of different generations does play a part in this as well. It is obvious that young people are more inclined to get their news not only from podcasts, but from TikTok, platforms like that. I'm not denigrating those platforms. I think every generation finds its way to receive information and finds a way to get that information that seems comfortable and authentic to them. But I do think that in the podcast space in particular, you do have the Joe Rogan type figures and all sorts of people who are, it's unfair to say imitators, but cut from generally similar cloth. Mm-hmm. And I think that those people are generally right of centre, even though, of course, Rogan did endorse Bernie Sanders back in the day. And related to that, though, Robby, I do wonder, I mean, from a Democratic perspective, this is quite worrisome. The idea that the Democrats have somehow become the party of the status quo, at least in the public imagination, I think that's pretty corrosive for young voters who typically are excited or intrigued by people who want to upset the apple cart a bit.
Yeah, the party of the status quo. They're also the party, or it's not. It's broader than the party. The ideological coalition of, like, there's something nagging or hectoring about the kind of vibe they put out there in the atmosphere, if that makes any sense. I think that was a problem Kamala Harris had. Not that I think she's a necessarily nagging individual herself, but just that was the general vibe. We should also talk about, I mean, the economic reality does matter. So Gen Z has it worse, certainly in some ways. Now, millennials also had a pretty bad situation. I graduated college in 2010.
The hard
and
times.
we had to walk 10 ways
Robby.
uphill through snow to do it. But no, it was at a time where the economy had really collapsed, really and truly collapsed to a much greater degree than they're seeing now. The job market was terrible. The housing market was terrible. Now, young people today, it is harder than ever. It's just continue to get harder to buy a house. That's an important marker of achievement and success that young people are thwarted in, that I would address by easing restrictions on building new housing and some other policies of that nature. If you're a young person trying to start a family, it's harder to get childcare costs more, education costs more, labor-intensive services have just gotten more and more expensive relative to a lot of consumer goods. Like, now you have better access to electronics and technology, and kids today wouldn't even believe the lack of communication technology we had when we were growing up. Although some people would say maybe that was a good thing. You had to actually go outside, play with people, had to get a driver's license, had to skin your knees and learn something about resiliency or that whole argument, that maybe kids don't have that opportunity because it's so easy to talk to people.
Yeah, but to your point about the economics, though, I think that feeds into what we were just talking about. It is harder for young people to afford a home. The job market in some ways is still has a lot of instability about it. Issues like childcare and all of that are obviously still relevant. So too for people who are working toward in less well-paid jobs. I mean, things like the minimum wage are real issues. So if you are a comparatively young person and you've had now years of this dissatisfaction, you presumably want to change the system because the system doesn't seem to be working to your benefit. And I would argue that it is to the detriment of the Democratic Party, of course, that it somehow hasn't really tapped into that anger and dissatisfaction, which it should be able to. I mean, I think that many of its policies, broadly speaking, are better aimed or more effective, or likely to be more effective at dealing with some of those issues, but it hasn't been able to create that, to make that resonate and to create the image that it's actually doing something. It is not the insurgent party, it is the establishment party, and that's a real problem.
Well, we are not going to use our newly discovered time travel powers to fix any of those problems, sadly, but we will have more Rising coming up right after this.